Okay, so this is the Concorde Final Exam help video. What I did is I just went through the final exam, found some similar problems, and changed them a little bit, and then created my own. So on this one, write the quadratic equation for a solution 5, 3. What we're going to do is write two big parentheses, and we're going to equal 0. Plug in x and x, and then plug in our 5 and our -3 into our equations. However, remember when we plug 5 in and -3, we have to change the sign. So instead of plugging 5 in, we're plugging -5 in. Instead of plugging -3, we're going to type in +3. So this is so when we on the side when we say x plus 3 equals 0, to get the 3 to the other side, -3 minus 3, we end up with x equals -3. So do you see how that's one of our solutions, -3? So let me erase this again and make room. So from here, we're not done unless the answer looked like this. What we have to do is just use FOIL or distribute. X times x is x squared. X times 3 is a +3x. Negative at 5 times x is a -5x. And -5 times 3 is a -15. Combine like terms. 3x minus 5x is a -2x. Bring down the 15 and the x squared. And this is what our equation would look like for the first one. Write the quadratic equation. Here it is. And 5 and -3 are our solutions. If I factor this one, solve for x, I would get x equals 5 and x equals -3. This is the solution right here. Is what they want. Okay. Let's try the next problem. Solve x squared minus 3x equals 18. Me personally, I always try to solve factoring if possible. So I'm going to bring the 18 over. To solve by factoring, everything has to be on one side by minusing 18 to both sides. I'm left with x squared minus 3x minus 18 equals 0. And when you're solving, you have to have 0 on the other one side and everything else to the other. And now we're going to try to factor this using the 3-term method. I want to try to factor this. Since there's only a 1 in front of the x squared, we take the last term, 18, and find all the pairs that multiply together to equal 18. 1 times 18, 2 times 9 is 18, 3 times 6 is 18. These are all the pairs that multiply together to equals 18. Try to use one of these 3 pairs to equal the middle term when you add or subtract them. The middle term is a -3. Do you see if I put a -6 and a +3 and add these two, a +3 and a -6, I get a -3. 3 minus 6 is a -3. So these are my answers. I put x in here. When I factor, I put the +3 and the -6 in here. And I'm pretty much done. Now I'm just solving for x. I have x plus 3 equals 0. When you have two numbers multiplied together and the answer is 0, one of them have to equal 0. The x plus 3 has to equal 0, or the x minus 6 has to equal 0. Get the 3 to the other side, -3 minus 3. X equals a -3. That's one answer. Get the 6 to the other side by doing the opposite. Add 6, add 6. And this is the other answer. Okay? So, solve. Here are my two answers, -3 and a +6. I think I have about 30 problems here, so this does definitely going to be a while. Here's the next problem, and this is just going to say simplify, do all the math possible. What you need to do first is look for this power outside. This is the power of 2. You have to apply the power of 2 to each of these in here. When you have a power outside of a parentheses, it attaches to each number in the parentheses. 3 squared x squared squared and y3 squared. See, then we still have this 4x squared y3 over here. 3 squared is 9. When you have a power raised to a power, you multiply. So I have x to the 4. 2 times 2 is 4. Power raised to a power is called the power rule. You multiply. I have y to the 6. 4x squared, y to the third. And this is all multiplied. You see all this. We're multiplying, 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 multiplying. All this is multiplying. So let's multiply the numbers first. 4 times 9 is 36. X squared times x4. Remember, when you multiply two numbers with the same base, you add the powers. 2 plus 4 equals x6. So x2 times x4 equals x6. And same thing with the y's. y3 and y6, you add them and you get y9. When you multiply two numbers with the same base, you add their powers. But here we had the power rule. Power raised to a power, you multiply. Okay, so when I did everything, I multiply the 4's and the 9, I get 36. X squared and x4, I get x6. Y3 and y6, I get y9. Simplify 6 over 5i. So this is 6 over 5i. Remember the rule about i's. If you watch the videos this whole time, you cannot have I on the bottom of a fraction. And what did I do to get rid of I on the bottom of a fraction? I multiplied it by I. And whatever you do to the bottom, so you do the top. It's like multiplying it by 1. 6 times I get 6i. 5i times I times I is 5i squared, right? Same as x times x is x squared. I times I is I squared. There are two things about i's you needed to know. I equals the square root of -1, right? The imaginary number. And I squared equals a -1. So we're going to change this I squared to a -1. We have 6i over 5 times -1. The I squared changes to a -1. That's a rule that we had to remember. So my answer is 6i over -5. You normally don't have a negative on the bottom of a fraction. A positive divided by a negative is a negative. What you can do is just bring that negative sign out front. Simplify means get rid of the I on the bottom of the fraction here. You cannot have I in your answer. It's in the bottom of the fraction. You can have I in your answer like we do. It's on the top, it's okay. But on the bottom, it's not okay. Find the slope. When we have 2 points, we have to find the slope. We have 2 different points. Remember the formula. Slope is m. Don't forget, the symbol for slope is m. The formula when you have 2 points was y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. And you had to label both of your points. Let's say this is our first point. And this is our second point. So this is x of our first point, and this is y of our first point. This is x of our second point, and the 7 is y of our second point. We're just going to plug them into the formula. I'm going to put parentheses because it makes all the math easier. First, we'd put in y2. y2 is a 7. Minus y1. y1 is an 8. X2 is 4 minus x1, which is a -3. So on the top, 7 minus 8 is -1. On the bottom, 4 minus a -3. If you have minus a minus, that changes to a plus. So on the bottom, we really have 4 plus 3, which is 7. And my final answer is -1 over 7. All right, let's try the next one. Solve this. Solving means get an x on. When we don't have x squares, we just have x's. We just get x's on one side, everything else to the other. Let's try to get this 5x over here. It's a plus 5x, so I'm going to minus 5x. 5x minus 5x is 0. I'm left with negative 8x, or just negative 8 over here. 5x minus 5x is 0. I'm left with 7. When the x's vanish, when the x's go away, there's two possible answers. One is no solution. The other one is an infinite number of solutions. Do you see how 7 equals negative 8? This is a false statement. False statement means no solution. If your x's disappear and you have a false statement, then you put no solution. So this problem, because the x's cancel and 7 does not equal negative 8, we write no solution. Now, if the x's canceled and we ended up with something like 6 equals 6 or 0 equals 0, then we would write, because this is a true statement, then we would write an infinite solution. But this is a false statement, so for this problem, the answer is no solution. I'm just letting you know, if you ended up with a true statement, it would be an infinite number of solutions. You'd have a lot of solutions. Problem 7. The third root of x minus 2 equals 5. Anybody remember how to do that? Remember, if you take the third root, we're solving here. We're trying to find out what x equals. We're solving for x. So I need to get rid of the third root. The opposite of third root is taking the third power. Whatever you do to one side, you do to the other. Remember, third power and third root cancel. I'm left with x minus 2 equals 5 to the third power. 5 times 5 to the third power is 5 times 5 times 5, which equals 125. Get the 2 to the other side. It's a minus 2. I'm going to add 2 to both sides. And I solve for x. X equals 127. Okay. Moving right along. Great thing about this, it's recorded, so you can stop and keep going, go back. This is the absolute value problem. Remember absolute value, and if we have an absolute value and an equal, it's really important that you understand this is an equal setup for absolute value. You have to set up this problem two separate ways. And it depends, if there was a greater than or a less than sign, there's two separate other ways of setting this up. But since it's equal, you set it up exactly as you see it without the absolute value. The second one, you set up the absolute value part without the absolute value, but change the sign of the number on the right. You see how now the second problem has a negative 17. So the first problem had everything was the same. The second problem, the number on the right-hand side of the equals, that's not the absolute value, that has to change the sign. And then we just solve for x. Get the 4 to the other side by adding 4. And we get 3x equals 21. Get rid of the 3. It's 3 times x, so we're going to divide by 3. And we get x. 21 divided by 3 is 7. Here's one answer. Here we got to get rid of the 4. Add 4 to both sides. 4 minus 4 is 0. Left with 3x equals, this is a plus 4. Negative 17 plus 4 is a negative 13. Divide both sides by 3. X equals a negative 13 over 3. Doesn't reduce, so we keep it like that. So here are our two answers for x. Don't forget, an absolute value with an equal sign, you have to set up the problems two separate ways. Exactly as you see it, the first way. The second way, the number that's not in the absolute value just has to change the sign, and then you solve for x. This is just multiplying these two numbers together. FOIL, using FOIL. 6 times 3, it's going to say simplify. Probably say simplify. 6 times 3 is 18. 6 times 4i is a positive 24i. Negative 2i times 3 is a negative 6i. And negative 2i times 4i is a negative 8i squared. I times I is I squared. These two can combine to 24 minus 6 is a positive 18i minus 8i squared. Well, you can't have I squared in your final answer. I's are okay, as long as they're not on the bottom of a fraction, but you can't have I squares. We all know I squared changes to negative 1, right? We can change I squared to negative 1. So that's what I'm going to do here. Negative 8 times I squared, which is negative 1. Negative 8 times a negative 1 is a positive 8. I can combine now. Do you see how they're regular numbers? 18 and 8 is 26. So these two combine to 26. The 18i stays there, and we are done. Next problem. We're going to do the same thing here. We're just multiplying, and the lucky thing is there's no i's. So first you have to take x times x squared, which is x3, right? X times x squared. This is an invisible power 1. The x stays the same. You add the powers. 1 and 2 is 3. X times x squared is x3. X times 2x. There's a 1 in front of the x, so 1 times 2 is a positive 2. X times x is x squared. X times 7 is 7x. Next, we're going to multiply the negative 3 times x squared, and I get a negative 3x squared. Negative 3 times 2 is a negative 6x, and negative 3 times 7 is a negative 21. The only thing we need to do now is combine like terms. There are no other x3s. We're good. X squares, I have 2x squared plus 3x. Oh, that's a minus, right? Negative 3 times 2. Negative 3 times x squared is a negative 3x squared. So this is 2x squared minus 3x squared. And 2 minus 3 is a negative 1x squared. And then I have x's. 7 minus 6 is a positive 1x, and then I have the minus 21. At the end, you only combine like terms. After that, you're done. Number 12, we have f of 3, and then they give us the function. All we're doing is plugging 3 into x, right? Remember, when you write a function, what is in that parentheses represents the x. So all we're doing is plugging the 3 into the x and doing the math. 2 times x to the third plus 4 times x squared minus 6 times x plus 7. And we're going to put 3. This is the 3 that goes into the x. We're just going to do the math using the order of operations correctly. 3 to the third power. 3 times 3 is 9, times 3 is 27, so this is 2 times 27, which is 54. 3 squared, 3 times 3 is 9, so this is 4 times 9, which is 36. 6 times 3 is negative 18 plus 7. Combine the terms, 80, 90. 90 minus 18 is 72. 72 plus 7, I believe, is 79. I got 79, 18, that looks about right. I hope it's right. Next problem. When I have two fractions that equal each other, I'm solving for x. I'm trying to find out what x equals. I'm solving. I like to cross multiply here. Watch what happens. X times x. Just multiply those. X times x is x squared. Then we have an equal sign, and we're going to cross multiply these two. This is x minus 3 times x plus 6, right? So we're going to FOIL that. X times x is x squared. X times 6 is a positive 6x. Negative 3 times x is negative 3x. Negative 3 times 6 is negative 18. These two combine. 6x minus 3x is a positive 3x. Minus the 18, x squared equals x squared. Okay, watch what happens here. I like this. I'll bring the x squared over. You have to minus it to both sides. And the x squares end up canceling. So I'm solving for x. I need to take the 3 to the other side and the 18. Remember, you always take the add or subtract to the other side first. So it's a minus 18. I'm going to plus 18 to both sides. I have 18 equals 3x. Then I'm just going to get rid of the 3. It's multiplying by the x. So I divide by the 3. And I get x equals 18 divided by 3 is 6. Okay. Alrighty. I'll try to pause a little bit and let you try to write some stuff down. How many solutions and what kind do we have here? First, you have to get everything to one side, so I'm going to get this minus 5 by adding 5 to both sides. And I'm left with 2x squared minus 6x plus 5 equals 0. So they don't want us to find the answer for this problem. They just want us to find out how many solutions. Remember the quadratic equation, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. We're going to use part of this. We're going to use the inside of this called the discriminant. Discriminant. Pretty much everything we've doing here we've done in a previous help video. So we're only going to calculate the discriminant. The number in front of x squared is a equals 2. B is the number in front of x, b equals a negative 6, and then c is the number without the x, c is 5. And we're going to plug it into b squared minus 4ac. B squared minus 4 times a times c. B squared, b is negative 6. A was 2 and c was 5. Negative 6 squared, negative 6 times negative 6 is 36. Negative 4 times 2 is 8. Negative 8 times 5 is negative 40. 36 minus 40 is a negative 4. So my answer is a negative. I don't care what the answer is. I just want to know if it's 0, positive, or negative. Remember I said if your answer was 0, then you would have one real solution. We had wrote this down before. If your answer was positive, you'd have 2 real solutions. If your answer is negative, you'd have 2 imaginary solutions. So they just want to know how many solutions and what kind. Our answer was negative. It's a negative 4. So since it's negative, our answer is we have 2 imaginary solutions. If it was positive, you'd write 2 real solutions. If it was negative, or if it was 0, you'd write 1 real solution. But since it's negative, we write 2 imaginary solutions. Which is not a function. I kind of remember this being the first week of class. I can't remember each week. Kind of like remembering the first week of class. This is a function. This is a straight line. Y equals x. The only time I said, here's some items that I said were not functions. If we had a y squared. So I'm going to put not a function. If we had a y squared. I don't see a y squared in any of these. If we had a repeating x, like if I had a 2 and a 2, if I have a repeating x that's not a function, repeat, do you see down here? I do not have a repeating x. So that has nothing to do with it. Here, this is an x square. That's okay, just as long as we don't have a y square. So this is okay, this is okay, this is okay. This is the only other thing that's not a function. If I draw this line, remember x equals 6 is a vertical line going through 6. The equation x equals 6 is a vertical line. I have many x's here. Do you see? This could be x equals 6, 5. This one could be x equals 6, 3. This could be 6, negative 2. Do you see how x repeats? And I said repeat. X cannot repeat. So when you have an x equals, y equals is okay, but x equals as an equation is not a function. So this is the one that is not a function. And there were a couple other ways we did it in the past, but just looking at these numbers, that's what we get. Find the x and y intercepts. When we have this function here, to find the x and y intercepts, there were two coordinates that you had to write down. One is if x is 0, right? X is always first, y is second. And the other one is if y is 0. So we have to find y when x is 0. So let's do that first. By the way, f parentheses x, this function, that's just another way of writing y. X squared minus 2 times x minus 8. So we're going to do the first one. When x is 0, we're going to find y. So we plug 0 in everywhere we get x. Y equals 0 squared is 0. Negative 2 times 0 is 0. So y equals negative 8. So this is one answer. By the way, when x is 0, this is our y-intercept. Anytime x is 0, we're dealing with the y. It says find our intercepts. This is one intercept, 0, negative 8. Now we have to find the other intercept. This time, y is going to be 0. So I'm taking the same equation. Remember, this is just another way of saying y. And I'm going to change y to 0 and find x. Well, in this case, I just have to factor. To solve for x, I have to factor x, and then factors of 8 are 1 times 8 and 2 times 4. 2 times 4, if you look at a positive 2 and a negative 4, when you add them, you get the negative 2 here. Positive 2 and a negative 4. So then we solve for x. X plus 2 equals 0, and x minus 4 equals 0. Get the 2 to the other side by subtracting 2. X equals negative 2 is one answer. Get the 4 to the other side by adding 4. X equals 4 is the other answer. So when I make y equal to 0, I actually get 2 answers here. So you see I made y equal to 0. I get 2 answers for x. One is negative 2, 0. If y is 0, I get a negative 2 for x. The other one is if y is 0, I get 4 for x. So this problem has 4 intercepts. It has 2 x-intercepts. X-intercept is when y is 0. It has 2 x-intercepts, and it has 1 y-intercept. Find the equation for a line that has the following slope 4. We're going to be using y equals mx plus b. And we have to find 2 things. We have to find m and we have to find b. We have m. Remember, m is the slope. So we have y equals 4x plus b. Uh-oh, my computer's acting up a little bit. Y equals 4x plus b. The only thing we need to do is find b now. What's good about this is we have a point which is an x and a y. If I plug in my point here, we'll be able to solve for b. My point is x is 2, so we put a 2 in the x spot. And y is 5, so I put a 5 in the y spot. So I have 5 equals 4 times 2 is 8. I take the 8 to the other side, minus 8, minus 8. And I get negative 3 equals b. So I have my m and I have my b. I plug them, y equals mx plus b. I plug my m as 4 and my b as a negative 3, and this is my equation. Okay. Let me see how many. That was question 17. Let me see how many I have. Ooh, wow. Do I really have this much? I can't have this many problems. 41 problems? There must be 50 on this test. Solve for y. In other words, when we say solve for y, we want to get y on one side, everything else to the other. Let's get rid of the 6x first. It's a plus 6x. I'm going to minus 6x to both sides. 6x minus 6x is 0. Negative 6x plus 8, a positive 8. Get rid of the negative 3. It's negative 3 times y, so you have to divide everything by negative 3. Negative 3 divided by negative 3 is a positive 1y. Negative 6 divided by negative 3, negative divided by negative 6 divided by 3 is 2x. And then 8 divided by 3, positive divided by a negative is a negative. And we are done. Solve for y. Y is on one side. Everything else is the other. That's all we have to do. Now, it could also, your answer could also look like this, negative 6x plus 8 over a negative 3. I doubt it. You know, you could have put the negative 3 under everything. It's just a lot easier and simplified if you put it under each term and then do the math for each term. So I'd be willing to bet this is what it's going to look like on, as your choice of answers. Number 19. We're just going to solve. We have two inequalities. So our goal here is to keep x in the middle by itself. So I need to get rid of this 3, and I need to get rid of this negative 4. You always get rid of the add and subtracts first. Minus 4 means I add 4 to all sides. And here we have 3 because we have two inequalities. 4 plus 4 on the right is 8. 4 minus 4 cancels out. I'm just left with 3x. And 12 plus 4 is 16. Okay, so now I just have to get rid of the 3, and I have x by itself. So I'm going to divide everything by 3, since it's a multiply. 3 divided by 3 is 1x. 8 divided by 3 is 8 over 3. 16 divided by 3 is 16 over 3. Don't change it to decimals. Leave it as a fraction. Try to reduce it if you can, and we're fine. Don't change it to mixed numbers. You won't see any mixed number answers, I don't believe. So this is our answer. X is between 16 over 3 and 8 over 3. Number 20. We have both square roots. We're solving for x. It doesn't say it, but I know what we're doing here. We're solving for x. I'm trying to find out what x equals. So first I've got to get rid of these square roots. Opposite of square roots is square both sides. Square root and a square cancel. I'm left with 4x plus 10 when that happens. Now be careful here, because you have to square the 3 and you have to square the square root. So squaring the 3 squared equals 9, right? Times the square root. 3 squared is 3 times 3 is 9. But now we have the square root and a square, and those cancel, and I'm left with 3x here. So it's 9 times whatever you had in the square root. 9 times 3 is 27x. Okay, so we're solving for x. We're trying to get x on one side. I'm going to take my 4x's over first. I'm going to subtract 4x, subtract 4x. Left with 10 equals 27x. Wait, 27 minus 4 is 23x. 23x. So I just need to get rid of the 23, so x is by itself. It's 23 times x. I'm going to divide both sides by 23. Divide both sides by 23. And I get 23 divided by 23 is 1, or 1x. 10 divided by 23 is a decimal, so I leave it as 10 over 23. And I have my answer. All right. 8 adult tickets, $8 for adult tickets, $3 for child tickets. Total of 195 tickets. Sold for $11.85. How many adult tickets and child tickets were sold? So I definitely did one of these in a previous problem. First, we're going to add the adult tickets. We got to create 2 equations. Actually, let me make a little room so I can do this problem. We got to create 2 equations. The adult tickets plus the child tickets. The number A is the number of adult tickets. C is the number of child tickets. How many tickets do we have together? Equal 195. Do you see, if you add up the adult tickets plus the child tickets, just the numbers of them, you have 195 tickets. Now, each adult ticket is $8, so I take $8 times the number of adult tickets plus $3 times the number of child tickets. When I add up all the money, I get $11.85. So here are my 2 equations. And I need to solve this using substitution or elimination. Remember that elimination method. I'm going to use elimination. So I'm going to multiply. You can multiply the top row by -8, or you can multiply the top row by -3. Either way, we're going to eliminate one of them. Watch. I'm going to multiply the top row by -3. -3 times each term up here. Watch what happens when I do that, and that's why. Now, I'm not picking -3 at random. I'm picking -3 because when I put a multiply this by -3, do you see how the C's will cancel? The C's will cancel. I could have picked -8, and then the A's would have canceled, but I'm picking -3, so the C's cancel. -3 times A is -3A. -3 times C is -3C. -3 times 195 is -585. Just on your calculator, -3 times 195, you get -585. The second row I'm leaving alone. 8A plus 3C equals 1185. Now, remember, I'm using the elimination, sometimes called the addition method. If I add them going down, minus 3A plus 8A is 5A. 3C, a minus 3C and a plus 3C cancel. -585 plus 1185 equals 600. So to find out the number of adult tickets, just divide both sides by 5. You see, get rid of the 5. It's 5 times A. Get rid of the 5. 600 divided by 5 on my calculator, I get 120 adult tickets. The question is, how many adult tickets were there? 120. Now the next question is, how many child tickets do we have? If we had 195 tickets together, I would have, 75 child tickets, because 120 plus 75 equal 195. So as soon as I know adults, I just add the number to find out how many is 195, or 195 minus 120 is 75 to find the child's tickets. Okie dokie. Number 22. You can't multiply these because this is a square root and the other one is the third root. All right, if you don't see anything, there's a square root there. So I'm going to rewrite it. This is 3 with a 1 power and a square root. Remember, we could write it like that. This one is 3 with a 1 power and a third root. Now, just like we did over here, x squared times x3, the base, when you multiply two numbers with the same base, they both have x's, the x stays the same. You add the powers. 3 plus 2 is 5, or 2 plus 3 is 5. Here, the base is going to stay the same. We're going to add the fractions, 1/2 plus 1/3. So let's do that. 1/2 plus 1/3. You need a common denominator of 6. I multiplied by 3 to get 6, so I multiply the top number by 3, right? Here I multiplied by 2 to get 6, so I multiply the top number by 2. 1 times 2 is 2. When you add fractions with the same bottoms, you add the tops, you don't touch the bottom. So this equals 1/2 plus 2/3 equals 5/6. This is my answer. But if your answer doesn't look like this, you need to change it to radical form. It has a power of 5 and a root of 6. So you could either, so this is the answer, this is the answer. Now there's one other way of writing the answer where the power of 5 goes on the outside. So you can put it in the inside next to the 3 or on the outside of the radical. But they both have the 6th root. So all of these 3 are possible ways of writing the answer for this problem. Put this in scientific notation. Remember, scientific notation, you can only have one decimal, one number to the left of the decimal, so it's going to be 6.623 times 10 to a certain power. So the decimal was over here. How many spaces did I move it over there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces. So the question is this going to be a -6 or a +6 that we put as a power? One of these is the answer. Do you see how this is a large number, 6,623,000? Large numbers you use a positive. Large numbers you use a positive power. So this answer is 6.623 times 10 to the 6th power. If this was a small number like 0.000000623, change it to scientific notation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This would be 6.23 times 10 to the -6. The negative means you're dealing with, that you have a small number there, a small, really small decimal number. But since it's positive, we got a large number, we put the positive there. Identify the asymptotes. Remember, you have to factor the bottom. The bottom factor is to x plus 5. Two-term x minus 5. So you have x equals -5 and when you solve for x, you have x equals -5 and x equals a +5. This is your vertical asymptotes. These are your vertical asymptotes. You set the bottom equal to 0 and then solve for x. If your top power is larger than your bottom power, you don't have an asymptote. Now here I have an x and an x squared. This time my top power is less than my top power. So in this case, you have another asymptote, but it's your horizontal asymptote. And anytime, if your top power, if your bottom power is larger than your top power, then you would just have a horizontal asymptote at x equals 0. I don't know if they're asking for horizontal and vertical. I know previously we just talked about the vertical ones. I think we just talked about the vertical ones. Factor this. Okay. This is the first couple of weeks, we talked about factoring the two-term method, but that's when we had an x square. This is an x3, and we did one of these. First of all, before you always try to factor, do you see how I can factor out a GCF of 3? 3 divided by 3 is x3. 81 divided by 3 is actually 27. So I just factored out a GCF of 3 out of this problem. Okay, I factored out a GCF of 3 out of this problem. Next, here you have to recognize you have an x to the third power plus something to the third. 27 is 3 to the third. There's still this 3 out in front here. Do you see how I can change this to x to the third plus 3 to the third? So when we did this problem way back, I told you that I think it was the difference of cubes. This is, since we have a plus sign, this is called the sum of cubes. You can look up the sum of cubes. And to factor this, the formula tells you, I don't know if they're using A's or B's. I'm going to put an A and a B here. This is what the formula tells you. Put an A plus B here. Then we're going to take A squared minus A times B plus B squared. This is the formula they give you when you look up sum of cubes. So you see A is whatever's in this parentheses, which is x. B is whatever is in this parentheses, which is 3. B is 3. So A squared, A is x, x squared, minus A times B. A is x and B is 3. A times B is 3 times x, or 3x. And then B squared, we already said B is 3. So B squared, B squared, the square should be on the B, not the outside. So B squared, 3 squared is 9. So this is what the factor would look like. There's a formula for that in the book. If you look at sum of cubes, they show you this formula. You have to create this to the third power and this to the third power, and you're dealing with A and B. A is x and B is 3. They might be using different letters other than A or B, but this is pretty much the gist of it. You can actually look up the sum of cubes if you don't remember. We did one quick problem like this. If you remember that, this is like, I think, week 2 or probably week 3. Factor this problem. There's a 1 in front of x squared, so we just take all the pairs that multiply together. 24. 1 times 24. 2 times 12 is 24. 3 times 8 is 24. 4 times 6 is 24. And then you could say 6 times 4, 8 times 3. You don't have to repeat yourself. Which one of these pairs will we add up to equal 11? Do you see how if I put a plus 3 and a plus 8, that equals the middle term 11 if I add them? So that's my answer to factor. I put x, x, and use these numbers, a plus 3 and a plus 8. Plus 3, plus 8, and we are done. That's how you factor. Factor 3 terms when the number in front of x squared equals 1. Number 27. Remember, we're going to 40-somethings. We're under 42. Wait, 27. Oh, this is 27. Find the equation for a line perpendicular to x minus 4y equals 7. So this is the one where I drew 2 lines here. Find an equation perpendicular to x minus 4y equals 7, and it goes through negative 4, 3. So we're looking for an equation on this side of the line. But it has to be perpendicular to this side. So remember, there's something special about perpendicular slopes. Let's get y by itself on one side. I want to get the x to the other side by minusing x, and I'm left with negative 4y equals negative x plus 7. I'm going to divide both sides by negative 4. Negative 4 times y, so I'm dividing by negative 4. Negative 4 divided by negative 4 equals a positive 1y. Negative divided by negative is a positive, and there's really an invisible one there. I want to show you that this is really a positive 1/4 times x, and then positive divided by negative is a negative 7/4. So the key to this is looking at the slope. Remember, y equals mx plus b. The slope is the number next to the x. So if we had a parallel line, then the slopes would be the same. But we have perpendicular line. So if we have 1/4, it's perpendicular slope. You flip it 4/1 and change its sign. It was positive, now it's negative. So the slope on the left-hand side is a negative 4/1, which is negative 4. Remember, we're finding an equation. We need two things when we find an equation. Y equals mx plus b. Two things we need. We need the m and the b. We have the m. The slope is negative 4. So we just found the slope. The only thing we need to do now is find b. We have a point, an x and a y, so we did one of these earlier where you plug in the x and a y and then find b. So we're going to plug in the y is 3 minus 4 times x, and x is actually a negative 4. If you look up here, x is negative 4 and y is 3. Negative 4 plus b. Negative 4 times negative 4 is a positive 16. Get the 16 to the other side by minusing 16, and I end up with b equals a negative 13. Okay, I have m and I have b, so my equation y equals mx plus b. Remember, we created m as our negative 4, negative 4x. And b is minus 13, and we are done. That's the equation. If they're parallel, we use the same slope that we created over here to bring it over, but since they're perpendicular, you have to flip the fraction and change its sign. Find all real and imaginary solutions. Since I don't have any x's, I have x squares. I want to take the 8 to the other side. Minus 8, minus 8. I'm left with x squared equals negative 18. So I'm trying to find out all the solution. I'm trying to find out what x equals. I have x squared. The only way around that, the opposite of x squared is take the square root. Squaring is squaring, right? Square root and a square cancel. I'm left with x. And then I have the square root of negative 18. And if you remember, I had mentioned that every time you take the square root of a square, you have two possible answers, one plus and one minus. So I just wanted to remember that. Also, don't forget, the square root of negative 1 equals I. There was something, because we're talking about real answers or imaginary. So x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 1 times 9 times 2. Would you agree 18 is 9 times 2? And then since it's negative, you have a negative 1. So we have the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 9 times the square root of 2. Square root of -1 is I. Square root of 9 is 3. Square root of 2 is just the square root of 2. And we have a plus or minus in front. So my answer for this is, do you see how the I and the 3 are in front? 3I square root of 2. The 3I popped out. The square root of 9 is 3. The square root of -1 is I. Those popped out of the square roots. The 2 is left inside. But we have two answers here. One is a plus 3I square root of 2. The other one is a minus 3I square root of 2. And there is our final answer. All right, here we're just going to simplify. It's going to say simplify. If you notice, I have a multiply. You always distribute first. 3 times r is 3r. 3 times 2 is 6. But then there's a minus. Okay, so then we have a minus there. That minus in front of a parentheses is kind of like an invisible -1. You have to distribute a -1 when you have a minus in front of a parentheses. So what we have is -1 times 2, which is a -2r. -1 times 5, which is a -5. So do you see I distributed the 3 in front of the parentheses and then this invisible -1 in front of the parentheses. Now we combine like terms. 3r minus 2r is 1r. 6 minus 5 is a positive 1. And we are done. We have simplified. We multiplied, we combined like terms, and there's nothing else. We're not solving for x or r or anything. There's no equal sign, equal to 0 here. So it's just simplifying. Just doing the math and then ending it. What are A, B, and C for the quadratic formula? So for a quadratic formula, they don't want you to find the answer. They just want to know what A, B, and C is. And in order to do that, you got to get everything to one side. Add 9 to both sides. I'm left with, these cancel. I'm left with 8x squared minus x plus 9 equals 0. Remember, A is the number in front of x squared. A is 8. B is the number in front of the x. There's an invisible 1 there. Don't say B is nothing. B is a -1. And then C is the number without an x. So they just want to know what A, B, and C equals. And we have it. Okay, number 31. We're just solving for x here. We're trying to find out what x equals. Distribute first. 6 times 3 is 18x. 6 times -2 is a -12. Then we have a minus x. You don't distribute to that because it's not in the parentheses. 8 combine like terms on each side. Remember those steps I gave you? I gave you these steps before. 18x minus 8x is 10x. Okay, now we need to get x by itself. I need to get rid of the 10 and the -12. You always do the add and subtract first, so I'm going to add 12 to both sides. 10x equals 30. Then I'm going to get rid of the 10. It's 10 times x. I'm going to divide by 10. And I get x equals 3. Number 32. Here we're just simplifying. There's no equal sign, and so we're just simplifying. Do all the math possible. 3 times 3 and 3 times this. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times -2 is a -6 with an I. Then we have a -2i. -2i. That's it. Combine like terms. I's -6 and a -2 is a -8i. And we're done. Distribute and combine like terms. This is a simplified problem. You don't have to solve for x or anything. All we're doing is simplifying. Distribute, and then combine like terms. Distribute is when you have a number outside of a parenthesis, you multiply it times each number in the parentheses. Which polynomial has 3 and 3i in its roots? You pretty much have to do the multiply. We have done this before. Remember when I said we have 3 to find the polynomial, we're going to put an x in there, and then since it's a 3, we have to use a minus 3. Then we have a 3i. So we put an x in there, and we're going to use the opposite sign of minus 3i. But if you remember the help video, if you have an I, you have to put the opposite sign of the I in there. You have to put the opposite sign of the I in there. So you actually, if it looks like you only have 2 roots or 2 solutions, 3 and 3i. But if you have 3i, you have to put negative 3i in there also. Then you multiply all these, and you always multiply the 2 with the i's first. X times x is x squared. X times 3i is a positive 3i. Negative 3i times x is a negative. Oh, x times 3i is negative, is a positive 3xi. Negative 3i times x is a negative 3ix. And then negative 3i times 3i is a negative 9i squared. I times I squared. These two cancel. We're left with x squared minus 9i squared. Remember, we change all I squares to negative 1. So we change this to a negative 1. We got negative 9 times a negative 1 is a positive 9. Bring down this, and then we're going to multiply. So I'm not going to multiply this. I'm going to try to save a little bit of time. But then you just go ahead and FOIL this and combine like terms if you can. Then you're done. Put them in the order from highest power to lowest power. So I'm not actually going to multiply that. I'm going to save just a little bit of time. We're already over 1 hour on this. I think I have about 7 left. Write in standard form. So standard form looks like this. It looks like ax plus by equals c. In other words, x and y have to be on one side, c, the number without the x, on the other side. A must be positive, and there's no fractions allowed. This is what standard form is. So first I want to take this, since x and y have to be on the same side, that's a minus 3x, I'm going to put plus 3x plus 3x. I'm left with 3x plus y on one side and a minus 5 on the other. I'm done. Do you see how my x and y are on one side? The number in front of the x, the number in front of the x in this case is positive. We're good to go here. X and y are on the same side, and there are no fractions in the answer. So this is standard form. X and y on one side. The number in front of x is always positive in standard form, and there are no fractions in the answer. Factor this. This is two-term factoring with the y squared or x squared, doesn't matter. Can you make it into squared? You see, the 25 is 5 squared. 5 squared is 25. But 16y, what do you put in this parentheses? 16 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So you put 4y because you still need the y squared. So you have 4y squared and then 5 squared. 4y squared is 16y squared, and 5 squared is 25. Then you write 2 big parentheses. You put the 4y, the first parentheses, in the first spot of each, the second parentheses in the second spot of each. You always have 1 plus when you're factoring 2 terms, and you have a x squared or a y squared in this case. 1 plus and 1 minus, and we are done. Factoring using the 2-term method. Solve using the quadratic formula. To use a quadratic formula, you get to get the 5 to the other side and the negative 4. So I'm going to minus 5x to both sides. Then I'm going to plus 4 to both sides. You see, I have to get everything to one side. This cancels. I'm left with 0 equals x squared minus 5x plus 4. Now, if you can plus 4. If you can factor this and find the answer, use it. It might be easier. Or we can use a quadratic formula. I'm going to use a quadratic formula and show you how to use it. A is the number in front of x squared. A is 1. B is the number in front of x. B is negative 5. And C equals 4, the number without the x. Then we're going to plug it into the formula. We're trying to find out what x is. Remember, negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So I'm going to go ahead and put parentheses for every letter. This is a negative, then the b. Square root b squared minus 4 times a times c all divided by 2 times a. And I'm going to plug the numbers in. A is 1. There's a 1 and a 1. That's where the a's go. B is negative 5. Negative 5 goes here. Negative 5 goes here. And C is 4. All right, so out here, negative changes to a positive. So I'm going to just change that to a positive 5 plus or minus the square root of, do this first, negative 5 squared. Negative 5 times negative 5 is a positive 25. Then you multiply all these. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times 4 is a negative 16. All over 2 times 1 is 2. Then we have x equals 5 plus or minus the square root. 25 minus 16 is 9. So what is the square root of 9? So I have x equals 5 plus, by the way, this whole thing is over 2. There we go. So I have square root of 9 plus or minus 3. Square root of 9 is 3 all over 2. So here's my two answers, but let's do the math now. X equals, let's use plus. 5 plus 3 is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. You see how one answer is 4. 5 plus 3 is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. The second answer, 5 minus 3. Now we're going to use minus. 5 minus 3 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Here are my solve using quadratic formulas. X equals 4 and x equals 1. Those are my two answers. That's how you use that plus or minus there. And you see, you could have factored this to x minus 4, x minus 1, and solve for 4 and 1. Okay, I think we got about 5 more or so. This is a complex fraction. Look at what you need to do is find the common denominator for all fractions. If you look at, I have a 3 and I have a x squared on the bottom. So my lowest common denominator is 3x squared. So I'm going to multiply every top by 3x squared. 3x squared. 3x squared. The 3's cancel here. I have x squared. I have x squared times x then, which is x3. Here, this, nothing cancels, so I just have 1 times 3x squared here. Nothing cancels here, so I have 3x squared here. Here, the x squares cancel. So I'm just left with a minus 5. So this is what I get for the bottom. This is what I get for the top. And we're done. You can try to reduce this if you can. It doesn't reduce. Nothing happens, so we're done. You just had to multiply each fraction by the LCD, all 4 by the same LCD, and we found 3x squared for all the fractions. And then you try to factor and cancel if you can. I can't, so I'm done. I mean, if you factor this top, do you see how an x squared actually comes out of it? Then you end up with x minus 3. But that doesn't help because nothing here cancels. So the answer might look like this, or it looks like this, depending on if they factor that x square out of the top of it. Number 38. When you add fractions, you need a common denominator. We have 4x, and I'm factoring this bottom to x plus 2 times x minus 2, right? It's a two-term factor, so it factors to that, plus 1 over x minus 2. That factors to that. Now, you need a common denominator. For the denominators to be the same, all I have to do is multiply this side by x plus 2. Do you see, if I put an x plus 2 there, now we have the same bottoms. But if you put it on the bottom of that fraction, you have to put it on the top of that fraction. So I'm left with 1 times x is x, and 1 times 2 is 2. So on the tops now, since I have the same bottoms, I have a 4x on top. 1 times x is a positive 1x. And then 1 times x is a positive 2. You see, I multiply that. The bottoms stay the same, x plus 2, x minus 2. You can add the tops. You don't change the bottoms. The bottoms stay the same. Combine like terms, 4x plus x is 5x. And then we still have x plus 2, x minus 2. Try to factor and cancel. Nothing cancels, nothing factors. So we are done for this problem. The key here is finding that common denominator, and we have x plus 2, x minus 2, so we had to multiply this by x plus 2. If you do it to the bottom of one fraction, you got to do it at the top of that fraction also. This whole thing is really, I mean, if you look at it, it's raised to the third power. So first we're going to do all the math inside. I think I'm going to try to do all the math inside first. Remember when you divide numbers with the same base? x3 divided by x, it's like x to the 1. You subtract. It's top minus the bottom. It's always the top power minus the bottom power. 3 minus 1, x to 3 minus 1. Top minus the bottom, you get x squared. And you put that number on the top. So we put that x squared on the top. Here, I have y negative 2 and y2 power. You always subtract. The y stays the same when you subtract. It's the top number minus the bottom number. You see how the bottom number is a positive 2, but you have to minus the bottom number. So I end up with y to the negative 4. And then I still have a 2 on the bottom. Now I raise it to the third power. Now I have that third power here. And I'm going to attach this power to each item in there. 3 to the third power, x squared to the third power, y negative 4 to the third power, and 2 to the third power. 3 to the third power is 27. Power raised to power here is you multiply x6. Power raised to power, you multiply y negative 12. And 2 to the third power is 8. 2 times 2 times 2. So this is not the answer because you cannot have negative powers in your final answer. If you have a negative power, you have to flip it. It's on top. The negative power we just have to put on the bottom. So my final answer is 27x6 all over 8y12. That negative power, you have to flip it. It was on top, so we flipped it to the bottom. Okay, how many more we got? Two more. Hang in there. So it's just going to say simplify, so we're going to factor. I'm going to factor the top. The top factors to x minus 4, x minus 1. If you look at the top, 4 times 1 or 2 times 2, a minus 4 and a minus 1 gives me a minus 5. So I have a minus 4 and a minus 1. The bottom, do you see how I can divide a 7 out of there? And I'm left with x minus 1. So you factor everything. I factor the top, I factor the bottom. Do you see how we both have a minus 1, that x minus 1 that cancels? So what's left is x minus 4 over 7, and we are done. You factor and cancel. Luckily, we both had a x minus 1 on the top and the bottom. They canceled out. Whatever's left over is left over. And the final problem. We're 1 hour and 15 minutes into this. Remember how I'm going to do this the long way, since I don't see huge numbers. 8 is really 2 times 2 times 2. X7 is x, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Y4 is 1, 2, 3, 4. Since we're dealing with the third root, you have to group things into 3. You see, I have 3 2's, so a 2 pops out. I cancel it. I have 3 x's, and x pops out. I have 3 x's, and x pops out. I have 3 y's, a y pops out. So on the outside, I have 2x squared, 2 x's, and 1 y. Don't forget, you still have the third root you're dealing with. On the inside, I have an x left over, and I have a y left over. Do you see? You need 3 of the same items for it to pop out. If not, it stays in. And this is my answer. That is the test, the final exam help video. 1 hour and 16 minutes. I know it was kind of fast for 40 problems, but the good thing is you can always hit stop or pause and then look at it and rewind and all that.